Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, Kaja, how are you?
Kaja.
Hi, Nancy, how are you?
Good, so good to see you.
It's really nice to see you too. I'm jealous you're in the office. I'm at home.
Yeah, it's this building. It turns out it's incredibly safe. The air turns over like once every 6 or 7 minutes completely. So it's a really safe environment. So it's been helpful in getting everyone back.
Nice. We are very slow with that. We have, but we're mostly doing computational work, so there's really very little pressure on people to.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you enjoying your time in Seattle?
I am. I'm getting a little tired of the working from home pandemic, but
Yes.
I can't complain.
Yeah. Yeah. Everyone's getting a little tired of it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm like, I really have nothing to complain about. I can work from home. I have a job, I haven't been sick. My family has been vaccinated. So, in comparison to what's going on, I really should be very grateful. And I am. And yeah, I hope all your families are safe and healthy and getting vaccinated soon.
Okay, just give us 1 minute because with the virtual meeting, people might be 1 minute or 2 minutes late to come in. Then we will start. Oh, thank you, Nancy and Kaja, for taking time to join our panel discussion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hope we have anything useful for you.
Okay, I can see people are still coming. Okay, maybe I can just start, because I will talk for a few minutes and people can come in during this time. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Yushu Chen. I am the vice president of Bioscience Enterprise Club at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory. Welcome to our Women STEM Entrepreneur panel discussion. So today's event was co-organized by Bioscience Enterprise Club and the Women in Science and Engineering Group at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory. So for our discussion, we will have a Q&A format. The first 30 minutes of the discussion will be moderated by Bioscience Enterprise Club and focus on entrepreneurship. And the second half will be moderated by Women in Science and Engineering Group, focus on women in STEM field. So I think by the end of today's discussion, we will send out a survey, and we would greatly appreciate if you can take a minute to fill in the survey. And your feedback is very important and very helpful for our future work. I think let me start with introducing our two panelists today. We are very excited to have Nancy and Kaja to join our panel discussion. And they both achieved tremendous success as entrepreneurs in biotech. Nancy has over 30 years of experience in pharmaceutical and biotech industry. So after earning her bachelor's degree in chemistry from Muhlenberg College, she joined Merck Research Lab as a biochemist. Over the next 30 years, she held multiple positions with increasing responsibilities, and eventually she became the senior vice president and franchise head, diabetes and endocrinology. She joined a startup called Kallyope in 2015 and has been the CEO since then. For those who are not familiar with Kallyope, this company focuses on the therapeutic potential of brain-gut axis. Nancy is also a board member for Schrödinger, Intarsia, and Denali Therapeutics. Kaja was one of us. She completed her PhD in molecular genetics in Dr. Gregory Hanel's lab at Costa Harbor Laboratory. And after her PhD, she worked as a postdoc at the New York Genome Center, and she co-founded a biotech company called GeneCove. This company focuses on the genomic research. In 2018, Kaja co-founded Variant Bio and has been the chief science officer since then. Variant Bio studies the genomes of people with exceptional health-related traits to identify new therapeutic targets and eventually develop novel therapies. So our, today's discussion format is QA. I'd like to start with just one question for both Nancy and Kaja. So you both built a biotech company from the very beginning. So how did you get the idea of starting a company? And what does it take to turn an idea into a real company?
Who would you like to
start?
Who like to go first?
Go for it, Kaja.
Yeah, I mean, for me, starting a company was the easiest way to kind of move things forward. So after my PhD, I moved to the New York Genome Center, where I worked as a postdoctoral fellow, and had this idea together with Joe Pickrell, who was my advisor at the time, to build better genomic databases. That's kind of how we started. We were, Joe was a human statistical geneticist. We were accessing, genetic data from a variety of large genomic databases accessible to everybody. And we've realized well, they're, very hard to access. They're very fragmented. They're built based on an outdated technology, which is genotyping arrays. So we decided there has to be a way to do it better. We decided to apply whole genome sequencing to build the future databases. We introduced this new concept of using low-pass whole genome sequencing. So we sequence the genome to a small coverage, something below 1x, and build molecular tools to create libraries in the lab. We build analytical tools to impute from this data, and in general to make sure that this data is very useful for building novel databases where you can detect novel genetic variants, which you can't do with genotyping arrays. So once we had this kind of a proof of concept, we decided, well, now let's do something with this. Let's scale this up, and that's where we hit a wall of academia and inefficiency of, you have to go through 10 different layers of approvals to kind of just do anything. And we hit this wall once and again and again and again over a couple months, working through IRBs. Every tiny change had to be approved by 15 different people who had other priorities, definitely not our idea of building a better genetic database. So we just decided, what, let's get private funding for this, and this way we will run this project and we can move as fast as we can. So that was my first motivation to start something.
So for Kallyope, I must confess I was not involved in the actual inception of the company. I started on day one as the CEO. Ironically, Kaja's husband, Ian Piken, who may be familiar with, who some of you may be familiar with, was involved in the beginning. But what I can tell you is the story of the kind of the Kallyope story in terms of how this all got started. So my understanding is that Adam Goldburn from Lux Capital was looking to do something in the microbiome space and had reached out to Charles Zucker, who was at Columbia University. And they, I guess, got to know each other over time and just started talking about what a company might look like. Of course, Charles is a sensory neuroscientist, and he, together with Tom Maniatis and Richard Axel, I think together working with Adam, had come up with this concept of using many of the sophisticated tools that have been developed for the study of the brain, and instead applying those to the study of the gut-brain axis. As you may know, the neural and hormonal circuitry and how that bidirectional communication occurs is not well understood. So the idea was you could take these technologies such as single cell sequencing, optogenetics, chemogenetics, circuit tracing, imaging, and build an integrated platform that could be used to dissect this circuitry with the goal of targeting it with small molecule therapeutics, actually with gut restricted therapeutics at the origin of those circuits. So that was the idea. It took, I understand, a couple of years to really incubate and take shape. I think Ian was very much involved in kind of helping with the original research plan and got off the ground in 2015. It was November of 2015. I was actually approached for the CEO position around May of 2015. And I was immediately intrigued by the idea and the opportunity, particularly given that the gut-brain axis was an untapped area for the development of therapeutics, and because the therapeutic opportunities were so broad, encompassing metabolism, immunology, inflammation, neuroscience, and gastrointestinal disorders. So big opportunity, fantastic people involved, really good financing, great investors, New York City location, kind of everything lined up, and it checked all the boxes for me. And so even though I wasn't looking for this kind of role, it was really a no-brainer for me to take this on.
So in the process of building the company, I can imagine you must face a lot of challenges. And so what are your prior experience? What kind of challenges you have to go through to build a company from the very beginning? And what are your prior experience help you through this process?
I can try.
Go ahead, Kaja, you start.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the biggest challenge is when you start very early and you have limited funding. You kind of have to do everything on your own. So you have to just wear many different hats. So initially I found myself, being the scientist responsible for the scientific design, being a lawyer, in a sense, signing a legal contract, setting up HR for the company. But we were like, for both GenCove and for Variant Bio, both companies started with around $1 million. So that's really not enough money to hire a large support team. So just being able to figure these things out on your own initially is tough and seems overwhelming. So I'd say that was my first biggest challenge. Right now, the challenge is, and it's on one hand it's a challenge, but it's also exciting, is just hiring people who are incredible and who are better than you, in a sense, who are experts in areas that you have no idea about, and convincing them, that this company is the right choice for them. So that's a big challenge, and that's a big amount of time that I really spent doing this.
Yeah, and as far as how prior experience was helpful, as was mentioned, I spent the majority of my career at Merck and ran a relatively large group there. And while there, I also had the really rare experience of following a program from the inception of the program through clinical development, commercialization, and lifecycle management. There was a diabetes program. And so that gave me a really good feeling for what it takes to succeed in the industry and what good looks like in the early space. And so I knew, I had an idea going in that despite we were a ground up biotech company and building things from scratch, we were going to need some ideas for like low hanging fruit so we could actually make some progress in the near term, because drug discovery is incredibly difficult and the failure rate is very high in the early space. And so having at least a couple of ideas of things that we could run with early was very important to our being able to continue to invest in the platform while moving things along towards the clinic. And in fact, those early ideas have panned out in terms of programs. Now one has entered clinical development and the other will enter clinical development this year. So having those early ideas, I think, was really important. I would say the management experience I had there was also very helpful in just building a team. And at a pharmaceutical company, you realize very quickly that like teamwork and collaboration are in the DNA of the company and absolutely critical for success. And so it was also important for me to hire a few people from that environment and bring them into the company early, just to help to, just to foster that environment of teamwork and collaboration. And we now have 65 people, about half from academia and half from industry. And that's where I say kind of the magic happens in, having people with different perspectives, working together in a very collaborative way to move the science forward. The other thing I would say that I think was critical for me in getting the company, moving the company along, was just having a network of individuals I could reach out to for help. So I'm a big believer in humility. Anybody who's heard me ever on a panel discussion, I bring this point up because I think it's so incredibly important to success. First of all, understanding how challenging what we're trying to do is, and being humble about it and asking for help. And so I'm very fortunate to have great investors and a network of individuals that I could tap into for how to do this financing, or, what should I do about recruiting for X, Y, and Z? Really tapping into some of the best minds in the biotech business for help, and not being afraid to say, I don't know how to do X, Y, or Z. Just picking up the phone and asking for help. I think it was critical to any success we've had at Kallyope, for sure.
And I just love to add that, my PhD training, I think, actually prepared me really, really well, which I didn't realize initially, to really tackle a variety of different problems. Because, it's very similar especially in an early stage startup. It's in a sense very similar to your experience during your PhD, because you form a hypothesis that this is your company and that's how this is going to go. But then you encounter a number of different problems, like your Western blot shows something different than you expected, or your sequencing data shows something very different than you've expected. So you kind of like reformulate your hypothesis and you test it again and you test it again. And doing that, starting a company, this is what it is. Because I think, and this is what our investors also told us, they've really never encountered a company that started with a plan and then finished having the same plan as what their vision was on day one. You just have to be very flexible, you have to be creative, and you have to iterate. And this is, I think, a recipe for having a successful company. Is just like not giving up and not being too stubborn going one direction, but constantly iterating and retesting your hypothesis.
Yeah, and it comes back to something you said earlier, Kaja, about building the team. And really what you learn is that investors invest in the team. And so even if, the idea is uncertain or you run into a roadblock, if you have a really strong team that your investors believe in, and you have really good investors who have been around the block, they will continue to support you and, just believe that, you will be able to overcome an obstacle or pivot and go in a different direction. So being really careful about how you build that team. And to your point, Kaja, hiring people who are better than you are and who really know how to work collaboratively is really important.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy and Kaja. I would like to open question to the audience. If anyone has any question for Nancy or Kaja, please unmute yourself and ask them.
I have one. Can I go? Hi, I'm Kuhulika. So this is again for both of you. So I'd like to know, so when you make a presentation specific in academia, like all of us have sort of been trained to always showcase the data and the results and like, specific aims, as NIH likes to call it. But when you kind of make VC pitches, when you're thinking about starting, floating a startup or something, did you have to kind of sort of refocus on how you present? And if there are some practical suggestions of what you should really include in those sort of presentations and like for aspirants of these kind of startups, if you could comment on that.
Yeah, I can start there. I would say that the most important thing to do when you're so-called pitching is not really to pitch, to basically talk about the idea, but in a way that you come across as highly credible. And really the only way you can do that is by kind of balancing this advocacy versus objectivity. No one's going to invest in something that you don't believe in and you don't convey enthusiasm and excitement about. On the other hand, the investors that you're pitching to, if they are the right investors, all recognize how difficult the space is. And so having them know that you also recognize those issues and you're aware of some of the potential obstacles going forward and you've thought through those things and you highlight them, I think is extremely important to credibility. So I think just getting that balance right between advocacy and objectivity is very important in these presentations.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think you have to always appreciate that, when we do scientific presentations, in a sense, it's just like showing slides with data, but in another sense, you tell a story, right? You tell a story from the beginning of how you had your idea, like how you tested your idea, what the conclusions are. And I think a pitch deck can be kind of told in a somewhat of a similar way. There is definitely a list of things that VC companies want to see in a pitch deck. So I don't know if I'm going to list them all, but like obviously, they want to know how your idea can make them money one day. That's like one thing that they would like to at least, have some information about. But those are things that you can get a lot of input on from, and just don't afraid to ask. Even if you talk to researchers around Cold Spring Harbor, if you talk to professors around Cold Spring Harbor, a lot of them interact with VCs. Some of them are venture partners in some different VC companies, so they can they could take you through different things that they think should be in a pitch deck.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think reaching out to people who have been through this several times is critical to get some good advice on how to do this. Yeah, I totally agree.
Thank you.
Hi, I have a question about the MVP, the minimum viable product. I find it kind of like you are providing preliminary data when applying for a grant, but without resource, how do I get that? Like how, in your experience, how important is that for your company, and how do you approach it?
Oh, that's sorry,
Yeah.
Nancy. That's a hard one.
I'm not sure I completely understand. So Kaja, if you completely understand the question, you should answer it because I'm not sure I do.
I'm not sure what a minimum viable product is, but I have a guess. Is this something that theoretically VCs want to see to invest in your company, like the first milestone you're going to get to? Is that it?
Well, I guess when you're I guess when you're even pitching, that's what I heard from all around about startups, business, that this thing is very important when you're pitching your idea. you would like to show, it's like prototyping what you are going to do, but like for example, sorry.
I think it really depends on the investors. I mean, it's going to be case by case, to be completely honest. Really depending on what the future company is going to be, because I guess in my case the two are very different. When we started pitching GenCove, we did have that. We have a technology, we had IP from the New York Genome Center for the technology, we've built an app, we had a set of analytical methods, and then we had a general idea of like who's going to pay us for using this. So I think this is where we were. And we've raised $1 million to just like test if our hypothesis was true. For Variant Bio, we had a dream that we can, work with different populations around the world, and that they're going to be willing to give us access to their medical records, to their DNA, and that we are going to have those incredible findings. But it's really hard to tell because those groups were previously really underrepresented in genomic databases. So there's really no, there's no prior research around that. So we could really compare and say, like, based on this previous research, this is what we think our success rate is going to be. So we pitched on a complete dream and we raised 25 million. So I say there's really no, it is going to be investor dependent, and it's going to be very like company dependent what it is. Is it a tool? Is it some diagnostic technology? Is it going to be therapeutic? I don't know. Nancy, you have way more pitching experience than I have.
I think that you're absolutely right. So for a platform-based company, you're selling the dream, right? And I think for Kallyope, because you had Charles Zucker, Tom Maniatis, and Richard Axel selling the dream, and it was so compelling because the gut-brain axis is just fascinating to so many, and they were able to raise, around $50 million. So it was because of the people involved and the subject area and the promise. For something that might be an interesting new target, it's a totally different scenario where, there it's going to be very important to have thought through things like, the degree of validation needed, whether there are biomarkers, whether there are, what the patient population would be. That's a totally different scenario if instead you have a pathway or a target that you're going after therapeutically. And I don't think you're not going to get a lot of cash for that, I don't think, until you really have a compelling story.
Thanks. And I think you brought up a good point. Is it necessary to have big names behind you as the advisory board, like Richard Axel?
It helps. Very, it helps a lot. Ideally as, co-founders, so even closer than just a little bit more skin in the game.
Yeah, and these guys are also very well connected to some of the VCs. And, this is something else I would emphasize, is that the quality of the VCs really, really matters.
Yeah.
There are, I think a number of VCs out there who perhaps haven't been around the block so much. And you really want high quality investors who understand exactly what they're getting into and understand the risks, so that they'll stick with you kind of through thick and thin.
And every next round, they will look back at who invested in the previous round. It's like, grants being reviewed. The first thing you look at, like, who's the author? Do I know this name, or is it a completely new entity? And then all of a sudden it becomes more risky. So.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have one question. I'm just curious about, so what's your daily job like as CEO or CSO of a startup?
What's the job like?
Yeah, what's your daily job like as the CEO or
Daily
CSO?
job like.
Yeah, daily job like as a CEO or CSO of a biotech startup.
Yeah, well, it's a great job. And I think it depends again on your style and the type of company. Like Kallyope is a really deep science company and I love science. So I spent a lot of time. I'm a big believer that if you deliver on the science, you know, the company will be successful. I think there are other CEOs that are more external facing than I am, that go out and are spending a lot of time always talking to investors and kind of talking up the company. But my philosophy is a little bit different. So, you know, for me, a big part of my daily job is looking at the science. And then obviously, you know, every now and then talking to bankers and investors. And then of course, just being sure that, you know, interacting with the scientists and trying to build as strong a culture as you possibly can. So it's a great job for, you know, somebody who loves science to be in a deep science biotech.
So yeah, it's just Nancy, you just described my dream job because my job is only starting to be there just because, you know, we were at a much earlier stage, and then your job as NEC is to do anything that needs to be done. And if it's like buying snacks for the office, sometimes that's what it is. So my job is I think I'm finally, we're getting close to the number of people that we need where I can actually delegate a lot of things and start thinking more about science, more about strategy, because otherwise, you know, you are kind of like run around putting the fires down when you're very small and it's very early. And you have to be willing to do it. It's fun, but it's stressful.
Thank you, Nancy and Kaja. I think we have to move on to the second half of the discussion. And Nicole from the WiSE will moderate. Nicole.
Thanks, Yushu. Yeah, hi, I'm Nicole. Hi, Kaja and Nancy. I'm a PhD student at CSHL, and I'm also a member of our WiSE initiative. And I think this is segueing into the second portion of our panel discussion really nicely, which is going to focus on your identity as a woman in STEM and how that's influenced your career as you've transitioned into these roles. But before I begin, I'm going to drop in the chat box a survey for our participants to please fill out so we can hear your feedback about how you liked our event. And so it came up before that this term of risky business, you know, it's very important to establish credibility and people that are investing in projects. It's a good sign to see that there's big names that have skin in the game, but would you say that when women are, you know, women entrepreneurs, is it risky for people to invest in projects that are headed by women? And so my first question is to you is, how has your identity as a woman entrepreneur in STEM influenced your transition into your roles? And I was thinking about Nancy, you know, starting as a woman CEO, as a brand new company, Kallyope, or Kaja, as you were getting support for starting your company. Can you just talk about that aspect of it? That was a lot, I realize. So you just feel free to comment, like on a personal or more of an institutional level. Just, has this been a factor or has it not been a factor in starting your career as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, for me, it really, no, I don't think so. It has, I mean, obviously, actually in my last job at Merck, where I was heading up the diabetes and endocrinology franchise, all of the other franchise heads were men. So in a pharmaceutical company like that, I didn't spend every day thinking about science. I spent a lot of time in meetings with an entire room of men. And so obviously I was very aware of that situation. But having said that, I have always said, and the best advice I've given to women in industry is you need to work for somebody who really believes in you and is going to advocate for you and really has your, your career in mind. And I was just always fortunate to work for all men, actually, who were extremely supportive of me and my career and advocated for me. And, so I always say, if you're not working for somebody like that, you should, go move and work for somebody who's really going to help you and mentor you and help to move your career along. So that gave me the confidence, having my management fully supportive of me, to be in a room with all men and feel like I could speak up and, not just to engage and network with them as well to get things done.
I kind of have to agree with Nancy. I have a feeling maybe you'd want to hear something different, but obviously I am very aware of the inequalities that exist and that face a lot of women, and a lot of women are in situations that are not, I guess we're not as privileged as mine, because I did not have, I guess there's not that many roadblocks that are being thrown in front of me. I also think a lot of it is due to the fact that I generally have a very strong personality. It could even be, in a sense, a bullish personality that makes it easy to interact with rooms full of men. I don't know if that makes sense, but every now and then you detect like certain situations where you feel like, maybe I've been treated this way because I am a woman, but I immediately ignore this. Like I don't think it's worth spending time thinking about this and being angry at this and just troubling yourself with this. It's just like push forward and show everybody that you're the best person at what you're doing, and just don't be, and I know this is extremely hard to say, but don't be afraid to, to speak up and to say what you think. And I just like just to, I guess this is a story that makes sense because it's connected with Cold Spring Harbor. I think one of the reasons I got accepted to the PhD program, I came here speaking like very poor English from University of Warsaw with 0 publications. Like I was confused why anybody's even honestly interviewing me. And later on, when I talked to the dean and to a bunch of the PIs, like, how did I get in? They said it was actually thanks to Greg Hannon, who became my advisor. I learned that after I already selected him as my advisor, who told the admissions committee when they were discussing every candidate, he said, I want the angry Polish woman. so my personality kind of like came through immediately.
Yeah.
Thank you for your answers.
Kaja
Yeah, I'm glad I want to cut you off. Go ahead, continue.
No, I want to say Kaja is so right. That is not to say there isn't a huge amount of inequality out there. There is, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
At Kallyope, we're about 50% men, women at every level of the organization. And that includes the management team. And having said that, we never had an intent. We actually don't have a diversity policy. Our policy has always been just to hire the best people. As a result of that, and probably in part because we are here in New York City, we have just ended up with an incredibly diverse organization with respect to gender diversity, sexual diversity, you name it. So, I think if we can get to a place where VCs and, heads of pharma companies, just can adopt a mindset where you're always going to hire the best person, we'll end up with more diversity, but there's a long way to go. And there's definitely an old boys club, when somebody needs a new board member, they think of their friends and their network. And often those are other men, which is why the boards are so male dominated.
Mm-hmm.
But, California now has, I think, guidance that you have to have X number % women on the boards. And so there's more and more recognition that there's a problem there.
And as a woman, you know, that has a certain position in a company, you definitely can. And I always push for those things. I guess we did not have any issue. We are a majority women in the company at the moment. And it wasn't really because of aggressive search for women. There's just a ton of really, really well qualified women who applied, who are available, who we didn't have, you know, any trouble deciding that we want them to work for us. But the board was an issue. I basically said we need a woman on our SAB. There's no chance that our SAB can function without a woman, and we made a conscious search for a woman SAB member.
Yeah.
So every now and then, I think you just have to be like, we have to make sure that we show that, you know, there is a woman that has a significant role within the company. So
yeah, I agree with you.
That's a great answer. Thank you. I'm happy to hear that, you know, inequality in this field especially has not had a negative impact on your careers. But if you could comment a little further, now that you are leaders in your companies, you know, suggestions for practices that would better support women scientists, women entrepreneurs in the environments that you work in. I know you had said that from your personal experiences, this wasn't something that was a roadblock in your careers, but is there something that you would suggest, you know, changes that might have helped this process for other women?
I think everybody's trying to kind of showcase women expertise. I think people are becoming much more conscious of, you know, there's no more panels that are just, I mean, they still exist, but they're being called out. If there's a panel of experts that is just men, all of a sudden people are annoyed, and, you know, there's a Twitter just goes wild. When there's conferences and there's only male speakers, people get annoyed because there's a lot of women expertise out there, and that kind of creates this amazing cycle for, you know, maybe initially nobody really knows about this woman, they don't know if she's good or she's not, but they'll just add her, okay, let's put this woman on the panel because she's a woman, but then all of a sudden she ends up being incredible, and then everybody else wants to add her to their talks, to their panels. So I think that initial push to be more inclusive actually made people realize that, like, yes, which something that we knew forever, that yes, women are incredible experts at what they do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say that, I mean, certainly, and this was my experience at Merck, and it's my observation also in biotech, you know, at the more senior levels in general, you know, there is inequality, as we said earlier. And, you know, it's not, part of that also is just some of the barriers I think women face who have families who are trying to advance. And I saw this very much at Merck, and I'm very aware of it, and at Kallyope as well. The reality is, I think women continue to do more of the heavy lifting when it comes to, you know, raising a family. So I was very fortunate to have a husband who was an equal partner for sure, if not more so, because he worked out of our home. And so he could do most of that heavy lifting. So I could put in the 12-hour days and still feel like I was, you know, that the family was fine. Because the reality is, you know, you're going to do what's in the best interest for your children. And if that means sacrificing, you know, some of your career, I think most women would make that choice. So I do think having, you know, really support at home, you know, outstanding daycare, you know, a way to, you know, make sure that your family is well cared for is really important. And I think the other kind of tip I had for a few people is try to compartmentalize your life such that you have your work life and your home life. And that was helpful for me, just mentally not bringing my work home, so I could kind of completely commit to my family when I was home and commit to my work when I was at work. And that was very helpful for me as well. So I think there are still many of those barriers that do make it more difficult for women to advance.
one more quick question I'm going to ask before I open it up to questions. Those barriers, do you feel, I know you said this wasn't really a factor in your own personal journeys, but in speaking with other women entrepreneur colleagues, are these barriers predominantly at the beginning of starting your career as an entrepreneur, or would you say that they persist or even change later on when you're later on in your career? Could you comment about that?
Well, I just think there is inequality kind of across. So I think it was the same at the beginning as later in my career.
I think just with time, you get really good at detecting, the boys clubs, and for me, I'm just like, avoid them. I don't want anything to do with them because I just have no interest. And initially I didn't know that, but with time, you get very good at recognizing that.
All right, does anyone have any questions? Feel free to unmute yourself, or you can also submit questions in the chat and I can read them out loud.
I just want to comment that I love when Nancy said that when your goal is to hire the best, you actually end up with more diversity. I think a lot of time there's some skeptics that say the opposite. So this is great and make a lot of sense.
Any other questions for Kaja or Nancy?
I'm curious, at Cold Spring Harbor, what does the diversity look like among the PIs there?
Off the top of my head, I would say it needs a lot of work. And I know the administration has commented about how moving forward, it's something that they're aware of and they're trying to work on. But if someone can pipe in and tell me what the actual number is, I'd appreciate it. But I'd say, I could count maybe on one hand the number of female professors, and then not even full professors. We have someone in the chat, 11 women faculty out of, I don't know how many faculty we have at the lab. This is something I should know.
I'm not sure what the total is, but I did count the women recently. And so I had that laying around.
So Cold Spring Harbor has some work to do.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's way more than when I was there. I think when I was there was a moment when there were 4 women faculty.
I guess one question I would, not really a question again, is something a discussion point is Kaja, you said you were the angry Polish girl kind of a thing. So do you think you guys as leaders have had to take on personas which ordinarily, you wouldn't be? Or is that something have you had to be more angry, aggressive? Is that something you've had to develop as a trait to be more successful as leaders? Or does that who you are is what you carry into your work day and don't, put on a different pair of shoes for it?
I had to become somewhat more professional. So it wasn't the angry bit that I have invented. So I had to just calm down a little bit to interact with certain people. So yeah, you always have to. I think in any position you kind of have to build a little bit of a persona depending on your actual personality.
Yeah, I would say no for me, but I'm going to go back to my humility comment because that is a trait that's more common in women, I think, by a lot, and a pretty undervalued attribute. And you often don't see it as much in men who feel like they need to know, often need to know everything. But it's been my experience that, again, if you've got the right investors and the right people around you, they are so invested in your success. They want you to ask for help. So, being humble and knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know, I think is highly valued by the right investors. So it goes back to, making sure that if you actually do something in this business, that it's the people, it's, your investors, it's your founders, it's It's the, you know, your scientists. It's really surrounding yourself with great people, and then you don't have to worry about those things.
Thank you. Thanks.
That was a great question. Any other comments?
So how do you balance your family life and professional life in terms of like hours per day? How do you split your time, your 24 hours?
Well, for me, again, when I was working at Merck, I was probably working 11 to 12 hours a day. And actually, one of my colleagues here who I hired from Merck, she was a very good colleague of and friend of mine while at Merck. And she was a little earlier in her career. And when she had her young children, she said, Nancy, I need some advice. I said, well, my best advice to you is not to do the morning stuff, because the morning stuff is awful. So get into the office at 6 o'clock, and then you can go home 4 or 5 o'clock and spend a nice evening with your family. And so that was kind of, for me, that was my strategy, you know, just go in early, compartmentalize my life, get the work done, and then go home and enjoy the family.
For me, it's more around the weekends. I just try to ensure that the weekends are just for me and you. Basically, what I do is just I turn notifications off of my phone. I think the issue is like with having your own company or leading your own company, it's something that you really love. So it is very, very hard to turn off because you're just interested in what's happening. And the nature of my job is we are building partnerships right now in 15 different geographical locations. So kind of around the clock, I get emails because somebody somewhere is always awake. So last night I had a budget call at midnight with collaborators in Australia. Tomorrow I have a 6 a.m. with India because of those like many time zones. So during the week, I try to juggle this just because you have to. With India, it's like a 13-hour time difference. There's just like no overlap, no reasonable overlap. But on the weekends, I do try to turn off and do things, you know, outside the house, hiking, skiing.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And we are not an email culture in the company on the weekends. We're not an email culture really in general. Not nearly to the extent as was the case in pharma. And no one sends emails on the weekend, which was really, you know, which is really a change for me. So that, and actually our employees, I would say, have way better sense of work-life balance than we did, and the importance of it.
Writing these tips down because I need to incorporate them more in my own life. Good question.
I came in late, so I don't know if this question has been asked before, but I guess how do you decide where to be next in your career? Like, how do you, I don't know.
I don't think about the next because I'm so excited about what I'm doing. I think the next will come when one day I'll wake up and decide this is not exciting anymore. So yeah, sorry, I don't have a good answer. That happened to me at Genco, where the company decided to make a transition to use the technology that we've invented mostly to apply it in the agriculture market. I was always excited about human genetics, so that was a decision within basically 24 hours that I've decided, okay, I need to move on. I want to do what I'm interested in. But as long as I'm doing this and I feel like I'm making a change, I have the resources to do what I'm excited about and no roadblocks, I'll just keep doing it.
Cool. Yeah, and for me, the biggest change I made was leaving Merck and coming into biotech. And that decision was really because I felt like I had kind of done the pharma thing, and I just loved it. But but I'd had that experience of seeing the end-to-end process. And biotech, I just knew that biotech was going to be where the innovation was going to occur going forward. And I wanted to be part of that. Thanks.
I'm going to tag on to Tumi's question, trying to tie it again with the second, theme of our panel. Is that, like, as a woman, is there something that, as a woman, that's different from what the experience of male colleagues, like thinking about certain steps you have to take to keep? I know you said when you're very excited about, your current role in your job, you might not be thinking about your trajectory or what might be coming next. But do you think that there's an element of that that's important for a woman who is an entrepreneur that might be different from a male entrepreneur, would you say?
I think it's what Nancy mentioned is family, is like ensuring that, when you are ready to start a family, how do you weave this into your career? Because of, certain biological differences, there will be a higher burden of having a family that will fall on a woman. And I know that, I think this has started in Europe a long time ago. In US, it's starting a little bit more of a push for men to, take paternity leaves. So there is a little bit more equity in, like, at least the first couple months of having a child that are very, very difficult. But, that hasn't started yet. But it's honestly also on us as leaders of companies to just, like, the rules are your company's whatever you want it to be. So it's on us to tell the employees, like, hey, yeah, there is a paternity leave, yeah, and we encourage you to take it, because that's, a step towards introducing some equality.
Yeah, I have nothing to add. I think that's right.
Great. All right. Does anyone have any final comments or questions before we wrap things up? Anyone?
Hi, this is Rena. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Rena.
Okay, great. I have more of a question for Nancy, because I'm at this point, I'm trying to graduate and find the next job. And I'm interested in industry job. So like you said, when you were in Merck, you're in this program, you started from like kind of a beginning and you carried on all the way. I wonder, because I'm more interested in science, so I wonder how to pick a program when you join a company like that. How do you kind of like see what fits you, and like what's the, like, I guess, strategy when you're trying to find a job?
Yeah, well, I think, as I mentioned, the reason I decided to leave Merck and explore biotech was because I felt that's where the innovation would occur. I think pharma is a great environment, but I do think going forward, more and more and more of the innovation is going to occur in biotech. So for somebody who's really interested in science, I would focus on biotech, frankly. I think it's more likely that you'll find something that really is exciting to you. And then among biotechs, they vary widely in terms of their focus. So there are deep science focused biotechs. I would say Kaja's is one example of that. Certainly Kallyope is as well. And so really doing your homework and finding those companies. And it's not, many biotechs don't have that kind of science, deep science component. And so a platform-based company where there are many angles, many ways you can go, lots to learn, might be a place for somebody who's, really interested in staying in the science.
Thanks.
Just one more question. I guess as entrepreneurs, you probably have very good understanding of your industry, the field you're in. Could you please just maybe comment on what's the biggest thing in your particular field, and what do you think would be the next biggest thing?
I mean, for me, it's advances in DNA sequencing, and honestly, like, which really come down to the price coming down. So I am waiting for the $100 and the $10 30x human genome sequencing. So that's going to be an incredible advance pushing the genetic industry forward.
Yeah, and with the gut-brain axis, I think it's just more understanding of the potential link between the gut and the brain as it relates to various CNS disorders. I think we already know how to think about it in terms of metabolism and some GI disorders, but it would really be, you know, a game changer if we can figure out truly how to modulate CNS function kind of beyond metabolism by the gut.
All right, we have reached the end of our panel discussion. Going to be respectful of Kaja and Nancy's time, but thank you so much for speaking with us, to our members of our BEC community and WiSE community here at CSHL. And everyone, again, if you could please fill out the short survey that's in the chat, I greatly appreciate it. But again, let's give Nancy and Kaja a big thank you again. And it was very nice to meet you guys virtually.
Yeah, likewise. Good luck to everybody.
Thank you.
Great to see you,
Thank you,
Kaja.
Nancy and Kaja.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.